Hey everybody, this is Perch, and I this story from the BBC News that LeBron James blames disappointing Space Jam 2 numbers on the long history of systemic racism at the box office. It's a troubling statement on both ends because we've just gone through this amazing box office for Black Panther with Wakanda. I didn't realize that systemic racism, and I also didn't realize that the BBC had rebranded themselves to BBC News but gayer, which I guess Pride Month just happened, so makes sense, checks out. This is definitely a legitimate account with real news, and we have to take it seriously that this is a breaking story about Space Jam 2. I'll be honest, I didn't watch Space Jam 2, but maybe that's the long history that we're talking about here. But it's these kind of breaking stories from sites like the BBC News, but gayer, that really kind of identify where we're at with a lot of information. No, I'm joking, of course, but it is it's funny how these things keep coming up where you basically, people are just now very tuned to looking at the Twitter handle, the icon and not the actual handle. And at some point I have to believe that Twitter and Facebook are going to step in and they're going to start to manage the names. And I just, these accounts aren't going to last. They're getting too many people. In fairness, I did appreciate the people getting really angry. So LeBron James, whose Twitter handle is King James, I have to wonder what he thought as people start tagging him saying, you can't blame racism. That'd be a weird day, right? I'm picturing, LeBron stumbles out of bed, heads to the toilet, is off looking at Twitter, and it's like, you have basically more. He goes from his 5,000 notifications to 50,000. He's like, oh, what's going on? And then suddenly he's trying to kind of parse through what this BBC article is, and then maybe he's fooled too. And he's like, oh, wait a minute, what? When did I give an interview? What was I doing? When did I do this? And then this whole thing is in my head, but it highlights the kind of gut point we're on with a lot of our media. We've just lived through it with He-Man. You've seen it with all these other things. It's the question I have for this, and it sorry for the opening there, but it corresponds to a question I got in email, which is there any path at this point to go back? And when they say go back, they don't mean go back to like storytelling in the 80s. This questioner is basically saying, when do we get people to go back to not being so polarized, not being so on edge about everything, because everything is looked at through a lens of, either racism or canceling or what somebody said in a tweet, 10 years ago, and we're going to bring it up and gauge it to their whole careers on this. Is there any path where people go, you know what, let's just stop doing that. Let's back off a little bit. Let's not worry about what Frank Miller said in 2010 during an interview around this comic book. Any of these kinds of things. At what point do we start just going, all right, the expiration point is here. We're just going to start looking forward. And when do we stop kind of looking at every film through the lens of which group it's going to offend? Because it's not just parody articles like this one. It's anything. If a cast is deemed to be too white or too straight, then there's a problem. If it's going to tackle politics, and it's a problem. There's people are like reading the metadata before they get to the film. So the email I got was, what does it take to go back, and do I think it can go back? And the bad news here is I don't think it can go back. Bluntly, I don't think it's possible for it to go back at this point. And I say so for a very cynical reason. There's just too much money. There's way too much money in this entire process at this point to actually be able to go back. We talk about the culture war from the standpoint of the people who are just in it and consuming it, the customers and everything else, and what we like and what we don't. But the piece that we forget about a lot of the time is the news sites, the advertising, the clickbait, the companies that are harnessing this anger, often both directions at once, to make themselves wealthy. And it's interesting because it's like a parasite. Many of the properties that have come about have underperformed. Even if you could say, I don't know, Black Widow is not a great example because of COVID and streaming and everything else, but a lot of these films now are chopping off part of their audience to appeal to the other part of the audience, particularly when it's, in one direction. That happens all the time. The challenge is people need as much money as they can get. So these people who are bringing all this stuff up, who are creating the articles and creating the news headlines and creating the advertising bait and everything else, and Twitter itself and social media and everything else, they are making money. They're making money that used to go to entertainment companies. And they're not going to give up on that revenue stream anytime soon. It's a part of their model. I mean, it's like, do you think that our cable news right now is big business? And the biggest part of that business is in the evening talk shows, whether it's right or left. That's what draws the most advertising and all the rest. And nobody's going to say, you know what, let's just go back to basic news, headlines and facts only. And because it's proven that the people who do that, they can't stay in business. So unfortunately, the very cynical answer is, I don't think it is. I think we've transitioned into a new model. And I think the outrage and the anger and all of this kind of stuff, it's too valuable bait at this point. And where comic books are concerned, I mean, the best hope you have, honestly, I think, is to find an indie creator or somebody who's able to kind of juggle it on their own, who finds a little hole, a corner somewhere, and they're able to produce those comics and what they can do. And they stay out of all this because they can make the business model work. In terms of the big two and everything else, I think they're constantly going to be living in this weird world where they're trying to make everyone happy, but particularly the people who are going to scream the loudest, even though they know there's no money in this. There's no long-term profit in this. It's a bad one-way street that people have gone down. I mean, the solution to this, because of how much money comes into comic books at the top around media tie-ins and licensing and merchandising and all that other kind of stuff, because of that, it's going to take a seismic change higher up that trickles its way down into comic books for you to see kind of the big two start to forget about this stuff. The smaller guys never had that cash in the first place, so arguably it's going to be easier for them to do it. But I mean, comics right now, it's strange. In the early 90s, when Vertigo and a lot of the indies were getting more prominence, there have been indies for a while, but when Vertigo came out, there was this kind of rush of new customers to say, here's a corner of comics for us. Here's something we like. And there's an interesting tone at the time of people who enjoyed the stories and people who I think seemed determined to make that corner theirs forever. It's hard to explain unless you were there, but we're living in a world now where there's kind of a certainty about the comics and the content and the culture and the material that's produced that people are sticking with. And they're not going to go back to kind of basic freeform entertainment anytime soon. They're going to stick with what they've got. This is probably a better topic for a live stream, but it was a good question. So what does it take to actually unwind from these reactions where something called BBC News But Gayer is able to kind of bait half the audience? The answer is nothing. It's too easy. It's too profitable for that to continue. And so they're going to keep doing it. It's going to keep happening. And this, BBC News But Gayer, I mean, that's just a Twitter account of somebody screwing around, and it doesn't, I don't know that it makes anything. It's a humor. It's like the Babylon Bee or the Onion or something like that. It's just tweets that are designed to be funny. But for the big business of outrage and here's who's doing it right and here's who's doing it wrong, and is this content too racist, not racist enough, whatever it is, I don't think actually any media company is doing, is it not racist enough? That's not anything that anybody's pushing right now. But you get my point. It's too valuable. And in comics, that's what people have decided is the key part. The goofy part in all this is when you look at the numbers and stats like we do all the time, it's the imported content like manga. It's the very all ages book like Dogman that's chewing up all the money right now. The people that stay out of it entirely. And that should be another wake-up call. It's not, but that's where we're at. Anyway, sorry, bit of a bummer, but we're stuck with this for a while until best thing we can do as consumers to protect ourselves from it is find content we like, collect it, support it, whether it's an indie book or a crowdfunded book or somebody's pet project that's on Patreon. Find it, love it, support it, hunker down. And, if somebody gets a genius way to fight back against this kind of outrage bait constantly, man, bring it my way. I will promote it all day long. Yeah, that's a terrible ending. Thanks for listening.